got this little spot meter from Reveni Labs. I'm gonna turn your eye into bionic spot metering eye. This thing is really cool how it works, and I'm really excited to test it out and to try it out. The good people at Reveni Labs sent me a note and sent me one of these spot meters and said, hey, would you mind testing it out and seeing what you think of it? Let us know, do a review. And so this is not out on the market yet. I think they're going to be doing a Kickstarter for it, or it's going to be coming out soon. And it is really a great little piece of kit. So I'm going to take you through it, tell you what it's all about, how it works. And then we're going to go in the field and test it out and shoot some photos and really see how this little new spot meter works. So for those of you who've been watching my channel, you know I really like meters. I have all kinds of meters and I love spot meters. I use spot meters all the time, especially with black and white film. With black and white film, when I use a spot meter, I can really hone in on the tones I want to create, and set my proper exposure. And so for me, using a spot meter is a really key piece of equipment. I also use an incident meter, but I use a spot meter all the time, even for portraits, for landscapes, for all the things I'm shooting. I love looking at a spot meter and using that. This thing is really tiny. It's really light. I'm sure it's 3D printed. It has just 4 simple buttons here on the top, the power and the mode, and then buttons to toggle through. So a really interesting feature of this meter is how it actually works. There's no viewfinder. When you look through it, you don't see a scene like on a regular spot meter and put the spot somewhere. You use your other eye. And so what happens is you turn the meter on and you hold it up to one eye. And at the same time, you look through the other eye and you look at your scene. And then your brain plays a little trick on you, and then through the eye that you're looking at, the little target comes up in that eye. And so when you look around, that target follows you around and you can see exactly where you're metering. It's a really cool little feature of how this meter works. One of the features on this is on the target, you have 2 round circles in the middle. You have a 1 degree circle, and then on the outer circle is a 5 degree metering circle. The viewfinder is very bright. It is very crisp. It's very clear. When you look into it, you can see all the numbers really well. There's no issues with that at all. So it has a really nice OLED viewfinder in it. It has 4 buttons. The controls are very simple. Once you learn them and get them down, I've been using this thing for about a week now, and it just becomes second nature on how it works, and it's not complicated. It's a very easy meter to use, which is one of the great features about this meter. So this meter has a shutter priority mode where you set the shutter speed and it'll give you the aperture, or an aperture mode where you set the aperture and it'll give you the shutter speed. This meter has 3 metering modes. It has a single mode. So that is the mode where you take a meter reading and it gives you your shutter speed and your f-stop. Pure and simple, that's what your exposure is, that's what you set the camera on. It has an average meter reading. So you take a meter reading off the brightest part of the subject of your photograph and off the darkest shadow part, and then it averages the 2 exposures together, and it comes up with an exposure that you should set your camera at. Now, the other method of metering is the PMM mode, the precision metering method mode. Now, the guys at Reveni Labs got together with Nick Carver. Nick Carver's a well-known YouTuber. He's got a lot of great videos. He does a lot of really interesting videos on metering and spot metering. So go to his site, check it out, check out his system, how it uses, but you can use this meter with his method. Those are the 3 methods of metering with this meter. The way this meter works, it works on an EV system of exposure, and it meters in 0.1 stop increments. So 1/10 of a stop, this thing is accurate to, and that's how it meters. When you look into the viewfinder, you see a black screen, and on that screen, you see on the top left-hand corner is your shutter speed. On the bottom left-hand corner is your aperture. On the top right corner is your EV exposure, and on the bottom right is your ISO. In the middle is your target, and underneath that is the R value, which is, I say it's the reminder value because it will tell you how the EV has compensated to get to your exposure. So how EV works is, if you look at the Sunny 16 rule method of exposure with 100 ISO film, the EV would be 15. Your proper exposure would be 1/25 at f16. That would be the sun, that would be full sun on the subject. In the EV setting, it measures the EV at 15 for ISO 100. If the EV is at 18 for 800 ISO, that's 3 stops. So if you look at that way, 3 stops, 15, 16, 17, 18, that's how each EV number is 1 stop of exposure. So if you are at 100 ISO and you take a meter reading with the spot meter, it gives you a reading of 1/125 at f11, and the EV says 13.6, and R says plus 0.4. Then the meter rounded up 4/10 of a stop to get to f11. So the actual exposure would be 1/25 at f8.6, or rounding off to 8.5. Your aperture would go between f8 and f11. I was very excited when I got this meter. There's a lot of really interesting things about it. Certainly its weight. This thing, it weighs like a feather, it weighs nothing. Let's go out, shoot some photographs. I'm gonna shoot some black and white film. We'll come back, we'll develop it, and we'll take a look at the results. One of the things you have to ask yourself when you're metering, and especially when you're spot metering, is what exactly are you spot metering? With a spot meter, you can help yourself out a lot, or you can also get yourself into a lot of trouble if you meter the wrong thing. For instance, we have that big white dome in the background. Now, if I do a spot meter reading on that white dome, it's obviously super white in the bright sunlight. It's going to give me a wrong reading. The reading that I get is 1/500th of a second at f22 at 400 ISO film that I'm using. Now, if I meter on the road, my meter reading is 1/500th of a second at f11. If I meter off this gray card, my meter reading is 1/500th of a second at f11 as well. Now, that means if I shot my film at 1/500th of a second at f11, this gray card would turn out gray exactly like that. So for here, that's the correct exposure. I know the light. A trick of mine often is I do meter off these gravel roads because it's very similar to a gray card in exposure value. I'm gonna take a meter reading at 1/500 at f11, and we'll see how this works out with this little Reveni spot meter. The other thing that I've been doing is I've been checking this meter reading against my Sekonic meter reading, and I'm very familiar with this in the spot meter mode, and I know exactly how it meters, and I know it's right on the money. And so far, it's very, very close. Like, it's maybe out by 1/10 of a stop either way. So both meters are giving me almost the exact same reading. I'm gonna shoot a little landscape here. I kind of like the shadows and the light coming down in this little coulee. And I'm gonna try the old trick that I do in the wintertime all the time with my spot meter, is I'm gonna meter off the snow, and then I'm gonna overexpose my image by 2 stops from what the meter tells me. So here, my meter is telling me 1/500th of a second at f16 at 400 ISO. So I'm gonna open up 2 stops. I'm actually gonna expose at 1/500th of a second at f8, and we'll see how this photograph turns out. So here's a scene where I'm gonna try the average meter reading. I am going to take a spot meter reading off the bright white snow that gives me 1/500th at f16. And then I'm going to take another spot meter reading off the darkest part of the area that gives me 1/500th at f5.6. And what the meter does is it averages out. My meter reading is 1/500th at 8.5. That's what I'm going to take this photograph of, and we'll see how this works out as well. This should be the easiest meter reading of the day. I don't care about the snow, the sky, the clouds. There's nice gray boards right on that grain bin. I take a meter reading right off that. At 400 ISO, my exposure reading is 1/500th of a second at f11. After my trip, you can see this meter was working really well out in the field. I love the little tiny form factor of this. It is really small, it's light, it's going to be great for backpacking. As I stated before, this is a pre-production model, so it's going to go back. I have a few suggestions for him. I'd like to see the lanyard, the lanyard works well. I'd like to see a little bit more of a solid way of attaching the lanyard. The buttons are great for your fingers, but in the wintertime, which I work in the winter 5 months of the year, working with gloves might be a little more difficult. But the other side of that coin is the way this thing is made, which it feels like it's not rubber, it's like almost foam or something, that unlike a piece of plastic or metal that would attract the cold, this thing doesn't get cold at all. So you can take your gloves off and you can work with this really easily. So that's one of the things that I really like about this as well. Bright viewfinder, a nice big viewfinder, easy to put up to your eye. It feels rugged. It feels rugged. It's not slippery at all. Like some of the plastic meters, they can get really slippery and kind of slip out of your hands. This has a good tactile feeling. Everything about this is designed really well, and I think it works really well. If you get this, the instruction manual that I got was very thorough, very complete. It showed you all the features of it and how to actually use it, so you're not going to have to worry about that there. And as you can see from the photographs that I shot, I think it's very accurate. Again, with any meter, it really also comes down to who's using it and where you are metering. I think that is an important factor that you have to consider. I'm not precisely sure of what the final price is going to be. I think it's going to be around $225 or $250 Canadian, which for me is a great price point. And I got to send this back to the people at Reveni Labs, but I can definitely see myself getting one of these because I think it's going to be a great little piece of my kit, especially when I go out in the backcountry and I really want to pare down the weight. I really like this thing. I think it's a good piece of kit. Thanks to the folks at Reveni Labs for sending this to me, letting me try it out, and also for supporting analog photography and photography in general. Thanks for coming along. I hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Cheers.